Hello, everyone. I think we can get started now as people are continuing to join, but I'd like to start by just thanking everyone for joining, for being here today at noon for this lunchtime talk. My name is Leah Keener, and I'm Bay Nature's events coordinator. It's great to see you all here today, and I'd invite you all to please turn your cameras on if you're able and in a location where that's something you can do comfortably. It'd be great to see your faces and to engage fully for this upcoming hour, and please stay muted unless you're asking a question, but it would be great to see your faces. Um, as I said, my name is Leah. I'm the Bay Nature Events Coordinator. For those of you who don't know, Bay Nature is a quarterly print publication that publishes nature and conservation content based that is local to the 9 counties of the Bay Area. And in addition to our print magazine, we also have weekly online content that we publish on a weekly basis. That's all local nature conservation news that's here, located here in the Bay Area. And in addition, we also have been building up our events program for events like these, which are online virtual talks and sessions with expert naturalists and biologists and people who are featured in our pieces and publications. And we also have a series of in-person hikes and outings that we bring people on that often are inspired by those pieces as well. For example, we've done a bear tracking hike. We just had a bear tracking hike this past weekend that was based on a piece written by Kim Todd that was published in our summer issue. So we're building up our events program and really grateful to you all for supporting it by joining today. But before we begin, I'd like to also talk about where this event came from, the inspiration for the event. And that was really a piece that was written by Jillian, who's here today. I'm going to turn it over to Jillian and just ask a couple of questions about what were some of the things, like what was it like to, how'd you get interested in this topic, hot bats, and how bats are grappling with climate change? Tell us a bit about how this piece got started, where it came from, and a bit of the behind the scenes look at what it was like to write this piece. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leah, for introducing me. My name's Jillian. I'm an editorial fellow who just started this August at Bay Nature, and my beat so far has been urban ecology. So most of my stories so far and in the future are going to be just that, looking at wildlife in cities, in suburban environments, and the interactions that take place there. So a lot of looking for stories has been trying to find different ways to find instances of wildlife and cities. So I've been looking at rehab centers, which have quite a lot of patients. Maybe they're raccoons, maybe they're seagulls. Um, they can really be, I mean, a lot of them are bats too, and some of them write little blog stories like Pacific Wildlife Care based in Morro Bay. And I came across one of their blog posts about a few bats that they were taking care of that were part of a larger group of bats that had suffered from a heat event down in Bakersfield. And that really struck me because what are a bunch of bats in Bakersfield doing all the way up in Morro Bay? And why did thousands of them drop from a freeway underpass? So all of the signs, I guess, pointed me towards something that this was an urgent story and something that might continue to happen in the face of climate change. So I decided to look for the scientists who were mentioned in that blog post, which was Erika Noel, who basically provided me all the details of what happened and was able to provide a clear picture of, this is not just an event that happened this year, but happened last year, and something that could happen again, and what the next steps for that might be into the future. Yeah, that was the story behind the story.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Jillian. It's great to have you here and great to see that behind the scenes look of what the editorial process is like here at Bay Nature. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Erika Noel. I'll just briefly introduce Erika. Erika is a senior biologist with McCormick Biological Inc., a consulting firm in Bakersfield, California, where she coordinates and conducts impact avoidance plans, field surveys, data collection, and monitoring activities for bats, as well as San Joaquin kit foxes and others. She's completed her thesis research investigating the seasonal trends in bat fauna along the Kern River from low elevation areas of the southern San Joaquin Valley to Kernville, California. Thank you so much for joining us today, Erika, and I'll turn it over to you for your presentation. we're all happy to see you. And also, for those of you listening, please, while you're listening, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Don't be shy. At the end, I'll be calling on those of you who have questions to ask them out loud, and we can have our Q&A session after that. But thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Erika.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me. This is just an exciting experience, and I actually see some familiar names in the audience out there. So thank you all for joining. The BAT community is a fantastic family of wonderful people. So thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, it was a sad event that brought this on, but hopefully there are some positive outcomes that occur from this. Yeah, so if I'll go ahead and get started. I put together some slides, so I'm going to fumble through sharing my screen here. So let's go through this. And there. Okay. Let me go back to the presentation so that it's ready to go first. That might help.
All good.
Okay. Okay. How are we now? Are we sharing?
I'm seeing your email actually. Let's see. Should be.
And here we go. How about that?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Oh, good. Whew. All
Perfect.
right. So, the Q Street Bat Maternity Roost Rescue of 2024 was quite an event. And let's get into a little bit about why this was an event and what happened. So for those of you who are not familiar with Bakersfield, it's in the southern Central Valley. If you look at this image, the satellite imagery, you can see it's quite an urban area surrounded by a lot of agriculture lands to the south and to the west and north. And then we've got the southern Sierra Sequoia Range to the east. The Kern River goes right through Bakersfield, and it is a major waterway and lifeline to the habitats around here. But if we're going to zoom in closer to what Bakersfield is and where the Q Street Roost actually is, well, it's right there in the smack dab dang near middle of Bakersfield, surrounded by really intense urban areas. So there's two major roadways that flow through there, and this colony lives in these roost joints underneath this bridge. So it's not, you look at it and you're like, what? And I have been working in this area for over a decade, and up until 2023, I had no idea that this roost even occurred here. And I think that's because if you look at the street level views of where this roost is, it's not too obvious that this would be ideal bat roosting habitat. When we think of bats roosting in bridges, normally, I think one of the first things that comes to mind maybe are those of us who've been to Austin, Texas, and the Congress Street Bridge is that it's over this waterway. And there are maternity roosts of Mexican free-tailed bats in Bakersfield that are roosting over the Kern River, but this was not one of them. So this is what it looks like underneath there. And in bridge structures, bats roost in crevices of the bridge structures, which normally comprise of like hinge joints, expansion joints, or longitudinal joints. And under the Q Street overpass area, there's actually 6 different hinge joints and expansion joints where this entire colony live. So here is another side of the Q Street looking at the street level. And in these expansion joints right in here is where the roost is. So obviously this is a very intensive urban area. So let's talk a little bit more about Mexican free-tail bats. They are a smaller bat. When we think about bats around the world, there's so much variety. There's tiny little bats that weigh nothing but 3 grams. And then there's the iconic flying foxes that have a 6-foot wingspan. Well, Mexican free-tail bats are on the smaller spectrum of that side, and they typically, on average, weigh about 11 grams and have a wingspan of about 10, 11 inches. They're insectivores, which means they eat a lot of bugs. They're a colony roosting bat. And this is the species that typically does form these really large communal colonies. And they do like to roost in crevices of rocks, of man-made structures, and in this case here in Q Street, in the bridge. They are a migratory species. A lot of people think that bats all hibernate, and actually there's a ton of variety amongst the ecology and behavior of North American bats. So not all bats hibernate, some actually do migrate, and this is a migratory species. And so they happen to come to Bakersfield, and at least a few different colonies come to Bakersfield, and during the maternity season, they migrate here and have their babies here. They mate in like late February to March, and they typically have only one pup a year, and that pup is usually born in late June or early July. They have a high fidelity to their roost locations. They set up their home along the way, and they're like, this is pretty great. And they have a strong sense to return to that same roost year after year. So if there's impacts to a maternity roost, especially really large maternity roosts like this one at Q Street, then it can really impact the species as a whole because those are very large numbers. So maternity roosts are a very important resource to all bats, and particular Mexican free-tail bats. I love these guys. They're pretty adorable. They've got this really cute, really like a kind of puppy dog face. And if you look, they've got kind of a bare bottom. We like to call this their little bat badonkadonk. And they're called free-tailed bats because their wing or their tail membrane, excuse me, does not extend all the way to the tip of their tail like other bats. This tail membrane called the uropatagium actually kind of stops right there. And they also have these sensory hairs along their feet and really long, narrow wings. And that kind of plays into their foraging ecology. So they're a really fast, open air foraging bat. They're one of the fastest bat species. They've been clocked going 90 miles an hour. That's incredible for a bat. When you think about flight patterns or flight speeds, you're typically thinking like a peregrine falcon. Well, this little 11-gram bat is riding right there with the 90 miles an hour. So he's a fast little guy. And they're aerial hawkers, so they'll just get that flying insect straight out of the air, and they can eat a lot of insects. So I'm bringing this to specifically the Mexican free-tailed bats at Q Street. This is an actual picture of one of the hinge joints at Q Street, and although it's blurry because I was taking it from below the roost, the images that you see, those are actual individual bats kind of clinging to the edge of the roost. So what happened in 2023 and what happened in 2024? So you remember me saying that I didn't even know that this roost existed prior to 2023. And I have to extend my gratitude to NorCal Bats for calling me and letting me know about this roost. A little bit more background about myself. I used to do a lot of bat rehab in the past. Unfortunately, I can't do as much now because of work and family obligations. However, in 2023, a concerned citizen called NorCal Bat saying, I'm in Bakersfield. I found these bats on the ground. What do I do? Well, Corky then called Brooke Stutz, who works with CDFW, and myself, saying that she had this report. So her and I went out to the site. And did find a number of grounded bats during a heat wave in August in 2023. The difference between what happened in 2023 versus 2024 was all about timing and length of that heat wave. So in 2023, when those temperatures did get above 112, and it came in later in the pupping season. So these pups were more mature. They were actually getting ready to fly, and be independent of their mother. And that heat wave only lasted for a few days. So during that effort, we worked with the Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network, who's a wonderful rehab group in Santa Barbara, and we picked up the bats off the ground. We hydrated all of them, and most of them we were able to re-release that night, each day that we found them over the course of a couple days. But some of them were a little bit more compromised and had to go to Santa Barbara for further care. Now, what happened in 2024? Well, we had a heat wave that was so extreme, and it came in really early in the pupping season. And when the pups were basically newborns, they did not have hair, so they were fully dependent on their mother, and that heat wave lasted 4 weeks. When Corky called me about the report that she received this year in 2024, um, it was devastating to find what I found. And the heat under there, if you remember the site level images, that asphalt, and just that congested traffic area, the heat under there was unimaginable. And so these pups were falling from the roost, very vulnerable. Most of them died on impact because of the fall from the roost onto the hot ground and into the traffic. And Brooke and I responded, and there we went. I wish this was us. Maybe someday I'll look this good, but we went to the site and we basically picked up what we could, triaged what we could. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not going to share any photos of the site during that time, because there was easily at least 1,000 dead pups on the ground over the course of the several days that we went out there to find the bats to transport to the rehab centers. And I'll talk a little bit more about the whole process here in just a little bit, but there's the biggest concern with what happened this year, again, was those high temperatures over those long periods of time. The thermometer on my truck, when I pulled up underneath there the first day, said it was 118. And if you can imagine being a tiny hairless pup, it's baking heat. So, and it dehydrates them severely. So once Brooke and I found all these bats on site, we got on the horn and we started calling various rehabbers and coordinators throughout the whole entire state. We did a lot of driving, taking these bats to various places throughout the state. And yeah, that's pretty much what I look like on the phone in the morning. So yeah. But as we went, during this time period of collecting bats off the ground between June 27th and July 19th. We took 39 bats to Pacific Wildlife Care over in Morro Bay. And from there, Melinda and her wonderful group of volunteers took care of those bats. And then we also had 46 go up to Gilroy. I drove them up to Gilroy and met with a transport volunteer. He was an angel by the name of Ralpha. I was exhausted, and I don't know how he knew, but he brought me bread. He's like, I've got a gift for you. And I'm like, what? I should be giving you gifts for volunteering your time. But he took those bats to Wild Care and the wonderful group at Wild Care, Rachel and Melanie. And from there, they worked with CDFW to distribute the bats amongst various rehab groups and up in Sonoma and Santa Cruz. So Native Animal Wildlife Rescue, let's just call it the acronym YUWR. Their group is wonderful, and Lindsay Wildlife. And yeah, it was quite the effort. Looking back at some of my text messages of coordination and phone calls to try and put this graphic together was it almost brought me to tears to remember the efforts and the wonderful people involved in this. But the efforts didn't stop there. It was actually just beginning. So once these wonderful rehab groups cared for the bats and received the bats, that's when the real work began because these are infants. Like the image that you see here, this bat is about 48 hours old, maybe a little less. When Brooke and I found pups this size, many of them still had their little umbilical cords attached. And so you can imagine the delicate nature of these little sweet babies. And they are hairless at this point, and are on milk from their mother. And fortunately, there is a formula that you can provide to them, and the little foam is what's used to for them to nurse off of. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works. But I'm going to play a little video, and if you listen real quietly, you can hear the little pup talking. And I was so excited. It's so wonderful to actually see the pup take hold and start nursing off of that foam tip, because you go, okay, we have a chance here. This little baby's fighting, so let's keep fighting with you. And as they grow, um, I've got a few different pictures from the rehab efforts here. You can see that how the formula is delivered to the pup. It's dripped onto that foam little tip there, and then they nurse off the foam tip. And it is such a rewarding feeling to see the little milk belly and know that this baby is warm without being too hot and well fed. And then as they grow, they get to be a little bit more gregarious.
Pocket full of babies.
Precious little things. You can see that they're getting a little bit bigger, starting to get a little velvety, a little bit more active. And then they get to this like junior high stage. You can see that they start to grow hair, but they're still on formula. And they start kind of growing at awkward rates. All of a sudden, their ears get really large, and they start really developing personalities. Well, then it's time to wean them off of the formula and blend up a bunch of mealworms and make almost like a soft food, baby food diet for them. And here's a little female kind of chewing it up for the first time. I'm not so sure about this. It's good. So it's a bit of a transition for them, in captivity. But the next stage, after they adjust to the soft food, and once they mature a little bit more, they start to be trained for mealworms, so they can be on a solid diet. And this video is from Jackie Turner at Native Animal Rescue in Santa Cruz. And then once they get down to, oh, okay, these mealworms are pretty delicious, then they start begging for them. And the wonderful thing about bats, I mean, there's so many wonderful things about bats, but they aren't like some other wildlife species in that they don't become habituated to this type of care. They can go immediately out into the wild and forage, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But here's the next step. You start giving them room to spread their wings. Again, this is from Jackie up in Santa Cruz, and they've got their little roost enclosure in the corner there, and then they're put into a little safe, like a little small flight enclosure playpen, and they can go through and stretch their wings. So even though we are hand feeding them at this point, bats are incredible in that their instincts to forage, echolocate, fly, find their colony, and migrate is so strong that they do not become dependent on humans, and that once they are mature enough to sustain flight and forage on their own, they can be released. So that's why there's not this fear of habituation. So, and there's been several studies by Bat World Sanctuary in Texas that have shown this. But so once they are developing those muscles, then they go out to a big flight enclosure. Here's Brooke taking out the bats each night and making sure that they all get their proper exercise. And once they're mature enough and they've developed their muscles, and this usually happens in the wild, it would happen at about 7 weeks of age, but in captivity, it took a little bit longer for them to develop. So in the end of August is when we started to prepare for release. So back to Bakersfield they came. And some of you are probably wondering why back to Bakersfield. Like other wildlife species, there is that high fidelity to their home range. And so just think of yourself if all of a sudden you were transported to some unknown land and just dropped out there. It would be very, very traumatic for you. So they came back to Bakersfield where they can rejoin their family colony and then hopefully continue their life cycle with them and enter into that fall migration. So the ideal time is to get them before the rest of the colony migrates out to their wintering grounds. So there is a wonderful volunteer effort through Flying Tails that was able to take a lot of the North Bay bats from up in that area, the various rehab centers up there near Sonoma, Wild Care. And Ken Wayne is the founder of this volunteer group, and Lou Rivas is his flight director. I'm going to show a quick video of the transport that Flying Tails did of the bats from the North Bay back to Bakersfield. So hopefully I can get this going. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to briefly play a quick little snippet of what the transport back to Bakersfield was like.
Well, we've got 37 little bats going with you, Mexican free-tail bats that are going with you to Bakersfield to be released tonight.
Right.
They're going in.
What happened to them? How come they needed help?
They came in, they had 100, I think it was 115-degree heat down there for multiple days. And so all of a sudden, it just got to the point these little guys could not stay in the cracks that they were living in, the expansion joints in the overpass. So they came out to get cooled down, but they didn't have the ability to really hold on. So about 1,000 baby bats dropped to the ground. And of those, I think 250 were rescued.
Thank you so much for flying these guys down.
Absolutely.
They will be free tonight. Going around.
There they are being loaded into the airplane.
Love you, babies. Look out for cats and dogs and birds. Don't have.
Yeah, so that's just to give you a little example of what this effort was like. And that flight was successful. Once Ken and Lou landed in Bakersfield, he was met by myself and Abby Gwynn with CDFW, and then we took them back to my house along with several other members from CDFW. There's Amanda over there on the side, and then there's Chris, and then there's Brooke, and basically we did a pre-release health check to make sure everybody was okay after the flight, and we did feed them prior to release so that they could use their energy that night to explore and get back together with their colony rather than focusing on trying to find food. So that's what, yeah, that's my dining room is a bat care station. There we go. So this is what it all comes down to, and this is what really warms my heart. This is the release later that night. I'll go ahead and play the video in the background. You can see the colony emerging from the hinge joints if you look closely, and then if you focus in on the enclosures, you'll be able to see the bats moving around in there. And basically this is what's called a soft release, and you can't really tell, but these enclosures are actually hung up on a support pillar about 15 feet up in the air. I had to get up there on a ladder and hang these up, and basically at sunset, I open up the enclosures and allow the bats to leave on their own comfort level once they communicate with their colony. And then in the morning, shortly after sunrise, I go and check the enclosures and pull them down and see if there's any stragglers that just didn't leave for whatever reason. And fortunately, everybody left during this whole effort. But if somebody did remain, then we would take that individual back into care and reevaluate why potentially it didn't go. But everybody wanted to go back home, so let's play the video. You can see in the background a bunch of them flying in little spurts as they emerge from the actual bridge itself. It'll zoom in here pretty soon, but you can see the bats moving inside the enclosure. There's a wing stretch. Oh, there went one. And there they go. Yeah, so that is beyond rewarding, especially after seeing such a devastation from the heat wave this year, is to actually see some return to their home, to their colony. So where do we go from here, though? So this really brought to light a bigger question on how do we handle this? So even though releasing 100 bats back into the wild is considered successful, when you look at the amount of bats that did not make it, the 1,000 plus bats that did not make it, this has to be addressed. And so with climate change and in intense heat waves that are lasting longer, what do we do? So this is something that we are currently working together with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as Caltrans. This bridge structure, this overpass structure, is managed by Caltrans. And so fortunately, they are taking this very seriously and looking into how they can mitigate for this. So from here, we have plans to monitor this roost and look at its thermodynamic capacity and see at what thresholds these things happen. We're going to have a response plan in place for if this happens again, and then also come up with the best way to mitigate for this roost. And some of that mitigation may be just putting in vegetation underneath to where it naturally cools it, or extreme maybe closing off some of the roost joints that are over the hot asphalt itself, and then applying mitigation roosts or artificial roosts on site to where they have a safer place to roost. Because one of the things that we're going to be looking at is there a big temperature difference of those hinge joints, those expansion joints directly over that asphalt, and whether or not all the exhaust and possible pollution that's coming up off of those cars, because this is a very heavy trafficked street area, is that also affecting this maternity colony? So this has greater implications for use throughout other areas of California, and hopefully in other places throughout North America, really where heat and heat waves are going to be an issue. There isn't really any studies on this yet, so this hopefully will bring some really good information to managers and other entities that may come across this, to where there's not as much devastation. And looking at the image on this screen, this is of the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. I think that this is a great example of coexistence with the humans and the bats. The bats are an important part of our ecosystems, keeping our ecosystem healthy, and therefore it keeps us healthy. And it is ideal to have a roost that thrives in a man-made structure and have the community thrive around it as well. So from here locally at Q Street, we're definitely going to be monitoring this and have a better response plan and hopefully prevent future heat-related events like this. This over the last 2 years has been quite the effort, and there's a lot of heroes involved. Flying Tails, of course, for flying the bats. Bat World Sanctuary is a wonderful resource on all things bats. They're one of the leading rehab entities. In fact, there's a picture of Kate from Bat World. She came from Texas to put on a rehab class here in Bakersfield. Corky's in that picture. Joellen's in that picture. If any of you have not seen the Bay Nature video with Joellen, I highly recommend going to see her video. She's extremely knowledgeable on bats and really does provide some great information. And of course, NorCal Bats is a wonderful resource. And if you're ever up in Sacramento, go check out the Yolo Basin and go on a bat talk and tour. Wonderful information about animals and bats specifically. And then, of course, the heroes of the rehab. These rehab centers, wildlife rehab centers, this is all volunteer. They really, really need support. And I'm hoping that another thing that comes out of this effort is increased support for those rehab facilities and rehabbers. Most of them are volunteer, like I said, and it's a lot of work. And so the more support that they get from the community, the more successful that they can be. And it only helps us. And there's really a lot to be learned from rehabbers. It's as a bat biologist, I have learned just as much from doing bat rehab and from other bat rehabbers that's information that you don't get through other field studies because they're working with these bats on such a different level and such an intimate level. There's really a lot that can be gained from rehab work, and they deserve so much support and so much praise. They are just wonderful heroes. So again, thank you to all the rehab centers. Thank you to CDFW for all the effort that they put in with this. And of course, Bay Nature Magazine for showcasing this. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Erica. That was a wonderful presentation and just so great to hear about this story and all the work that's been done to save these bats. So now I think we'll start with Q&A, and those of you listening, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. It looks like we have a couple already. Allison, I saw you have a question. Do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Sure. I'm a volunteer at Lindsay Wildlife in.
Oh, hello.
Yes, hi. I'll turn my camera on. And we do have bats. We don't have them out, on the exhibit hall. They're used for special occasions. And because I'm on the hospital rehab side, I had the privilege of using them as our ambassadors when we had a pollinator weekend and this kind of thing. And that was my question. I understand that some bats are considered pollinators, so that's yet another benefit.
Oh, yes, yeah. So most of the bats that we have here in California are insectivorous, which does help our huge agriculture economy, and also helps keep our forests healthy and therefore our waterways healthy. But pollinator bats, yeah, so there's also nectar feeding bats, there's carnivorous bats, there's bats that eat fish. Bats are absolutely amazing. Pollinator bats, we do have one species here that is considered omnivorous, and it's found throughout all California, and it is actually now our state bat, the pallid bat. So congratulations to California for having a state bat. And the pallid bat is, they have been found to eat cactus fruit as well as visit cactus flowers, and by doing that, they become pollinators. And that has not been documented in Kern County or parts of California that I'm aware of, but it has been documented in the extreme southwest of the United States and northern Mexico. Yeah, and pallid bats
And
are
we
pretty
we
incredible.
do have a pallid bat at the Lindsay named Vesper.
Lucky. Well, you have a superstar.
We do. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Allison. Next goes Cindy. Cindy, I noticed you had 2 questions. Do you mind unmuting and asking?
Sure. I
Hi,
wanted to
Cindy.
ask, hi, how are you, Erica?
I'm good. I'm happy to see you.
Likewise, likewise. Yeah, wow, just what an amazing effort and job everybody did. So I just wanted to ask, are all the bat fosters, I saw lots of, hands in the photo, they're all rabies vaccinated?
Of course.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. And that even though the care providers, may have ungloved hands in these videos, and they are trained professionals that are fully vaccinated, and they've gone through all the health tests and requirements to work with these animals. And different rehab centers may have different protocols or standard work SOPs or standards of operation that they must follow. And so if you see some of these images without gloved hands, that is not by any means suggesting that that is safe for other people to do so. And I think that, thank you so much for bringing that up, is that if anybody in the public ever comes across a bat, the best thing to call is, or to do, is to call for help from a trained and vaccinated professional.
Okay, and then my other question was, do we know approximately how many bats typically use that as a maternity roost, or have you even had a chance to look at that? It just seems like, oh my gosh, if that happens every summer, that could be a pretty significant impact to the whole colony.
Definitely. So I did do a rough estimate this year, and I'm guessing about 3,000 to 4,000 bats are in that colony. That is definitely why this is being studied by Caltrans and CDFW. And nobody wants this roost failure to happen again, because that kind of devastation is failure of that roost. That's a lot of loss of life, and that definitely impacts the population of that species here in this area. And so looking at causes, looking at how best to approach this to maintain that colony's health is something that they're investigating actively into this next year and probably the following year.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Cindy and Erica, for your responses. And let's see. Next question is from Joellen Arnold. Joellen, you're in the audience. Do you mind unmuting and asking your question? It's great to see you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. This is really great. Excellent work, Erica. Woo, that was quite an event. We were sorry we couldn't take any on here in Sacramento, but we were so overwhelmed by our own pups that
Yeah.
we couldn't do anything, but I was glad Corky was able to help you coordinate. So my big question is, well, first, before I forget, is there any thought about putting up some kind of a pup catcher at that site?
So that has been discussed in length with Caltrans and CFW. And because this roost structure is about 35 to 40 feet up in the air, there is concern with having a structure up underneath the roost that is not easily maintained. So if the pups fall, or if debris starts to occlude this catcher, it could cause a safety issue if it falls and fails and goes into traffic. And Caltrans needs whatever mitigation is in place, it needs to be for the most part maintenance free and hazard free. So installation of a pup catcher could cause some structural issues, possibly, and it would be very difficult to actually get up there and routinely clean it or check for individuals. So that is not currently an option that Caltrans is exploring.
That's too bad, but I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been, and I'm not saying that it won't happen, but figuring out what to put underneath there, because with a colony this size, as you know, they produce a lot of guano and it can be quite sticky, and that pup catcher structure is going to go underneath the roost. It's going to be connected, and that's also where the guano is going to fall. So unless you have a crew that's willing to get up there to clean that on an annual basis, um, it's not a viable option at this time.
Okay, well, my other question was, were there other maternity roosts in the Bakersfield area that didn't have that big pup fall, so they managed the heat better?
Yes, yeah. So the other two really large maternity colonies of Mexican freetails that are in overpass or bridge structures, those are actually located over the Kern River itself. And during the summer, fortunately, the river was flowing with water the whole summer, um, which I believe allowed the temperatures to remain cooler, and therefore they didn't have this failure. The other roost that is in a parking structure of all things, a cement parking structure. So not an overpass, but definitely in the sun, cement. That roost is much smaller, but they moved from the outside crevice that was in the sun inside to the structure to escape that direct heat. So they had this area to move to safely with their pups. So, and that actually is something that might be investigated with the current Q Street. Is there something that we could put up there so that they can move to an area that they can thermoregulate themselves and get to a cooler area if needed? But in this, I will say with Caltrans, another thing that they're looking into, and I'm so glad that Heidi Eisner with Caltrans, a biologist, she brought this up. She's like, I wonder if the pollutants, if the exhaust of all the traffic that's underneath there is also playing a really distinct role in impacting these bats. Because who wants to take their baby, and stick it next to an exhaust pipe of a car? That's ludicrous, right? So all these babies are directly above a highly trafficked area. So is that those VO2s, those volatile compounds, also playing an effect on this roost? So that's also going to be investigated.
Are they thinking at all about excluding the bats from that one specific roost?
Yes, yeah,
Like
and
for everybody?
yeah, so there are, if you remember from the street level views, a few of those joints are directly over the busy street. And there are a couple that are over the landscaped area. And so the thought is, can we do on-site mitigation and provide them other roosting habitat that's not directly over the road? And will that be enough? So again, everything's in early stages. We've got a lot to look into this following summer, but Joellen, you're probably going to be on call for the next summer. So because we're not looking at closing off the roost until we find out some more information. And with that, though, we have to have a response plan in place. And so it won't be a bunch of craziness. We have a monitor out there every day to actually observe if pups fall, when they fall, and have that direct response. And so all of you rehabbers out there, if we have another bad year, be ready, be on call. And hopefully we can have more survive this year if we do have heat waves while we're figuring out how best to help this colony.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jolyn, for your questions. And I think our next question is from Christina. Christina, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Yes, thank you. I'd heard that we have a dwindling insect population, and I'm wondering how that's impacting the bats.
Sure. Well, yes. So there's, um, I'll expand this to North America. So there's been a lot of shifts in several different taxa. There's been several different species that have decline. And whether we're talking about bird species, bat species, insects. Yeah, so there's been a very interesting study, and I should have, maybe I'll give it to Bay Nature so that they can post it as a resource. That it was just published back east, and they looked at bat populations back east where white nose syndrome has really devastated the numbers of bats and decreased the populations by over 90%. That's hugely impactful. And with that, they've noticed in the agriculture areas, they've been using more pesticides. And so that's had a very direct role on the community. And they were able to look at this data of the bat decline, the increased pesticides, and an increased human infant mortality rate. It is devastating. So if you look at the insects over in this area, yeah, there's been a lot of decline. And a lot of that is increased pesticide use, loss of habitat, increased invasive species to the area that affect the populations. This is not just a one factor. There's multiple factors that are causing a multi-system decline. And so for bats, yeah, they're fighting a battle on several different levels, whether it's extreme climate, whether it's loss of roosting habitat, loss of foraging habitat, and therefore loss of food items. It's definitely a concern.
Thank you. I think we have time for the two questions I see left in the chat. The first one is from Philip. Philip, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
No, hi. It's great talk. I have 3 bat houses up at about 5,600 feet on the east side of the Sierra in Alpine County. And I've been watching them for many years. And this summer, particularly during the middle of July, when even in Alpine County, we had a heat wave, the numbers seemed to kind of go down dramatically. And then by late summer, early fall, they all kind of returned. I have about 200 bats and 3 single chamber bat in houses. And I think they're Yuma myotas, little guys. And best I can tell, it might have been heat related. And I'm thinking about adding a 3rd house with 3 chambers because these are all single chamber houses. And I think from what I read on BCI, that might give them more options in terms of heat.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you mentioned the resource Bat Conservation International, because again, they're another wonderful resource of all things bats, including bat houses. And I think they advocate for successful bat houses is to indeed, just like you said, have variety and have the bat houses in different locations, different sun aspects, and different sizes so that the bats can thermoregulate what they need during that specific time of year. Because the bats that you may have in your area that are overwinter there, they're going to need different requirements than the bats that are there during the summer or warmer months and then the fall. So yeah, I love the fact that you've had successful bat houses, because most of the time people go, I put up a bat house, but it's been 5 years, no bats. And so, so yeah, I think variety is key. And yeah, so the more the merrier.
It's been great fun. It took about 2 years before I got any bats in my first house, and now I've had them almost 20 years, and now I've got about 200. Well, 200 best as I can count them.
Well, congratulations on your extended family. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Philip. Let's see. And I think maybe our last question, Allison, you had a question. Do you mind unmuting and asking?
Sure. You actually answered my question. It was in relation to Philip's question about how to attract bats to the house that we've put up. So I'll just keep hoping and maybe move it around to another exposure.
Yeah, and you know, if you're hoping, I think that some of the smaller bat houses get really hot. And so some of them may need an alternate like shade cover, or again, just more options. And yeah, and hopefully they see it. Even different colors of bat houses may help, like a darker color versus a lighter color on the outside may help thermoregulate depending on how much sun it gets. So there's a lot of involved. Yeah, try BCI. They have on their website, they have some good information.
Thanks.
Oh, and
And
one,
oh, sorry, did I see a comment from Joe asking about my sweater?
yes.
I got this. I'll have to text you. I got it online. It was a company from back east, and yeah, it's wool, so it's a little on the itchy side, but worth it.
We were also wondering about your poster, the awesome bat
Oh,
behind you tapestry.
yeah, isn't that great? That's a vintage educational poster from a classroom from Germany. And yeah, it's I think dates back to the 50s. And yes, it's one of my prized possessions.
Terrific, terrific. And I think we can wrap it up there though, but thank you so, so much, Erica, for your presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, and just a couple final things here. And one, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you to all the rehab community. You guys are absolutely amazing. Just wonderful. So thank you, and support the local rehabbers. They're just infinite amount of knowledge that really benefits bat science, bat conservation, and us as humans. And if any of you come across a bat on the ground, again, don't touch it. If you need assistance, get online and find a bat rehabber near you. And again, bat related injuries and illnesses are 100% preventable by not touching the bat. So leave it for the trained professionals.
Thank you so much, Erica. I think one thing I like doing at the end of our talks is just everyone unmuting and saying thank you as a group. So maybe if we can all just unmute, I'll count to 3, and then we can all thank Erica for her awesome presentation and all of her help with this and all of the work that she does. So, okay, 1, 2, 3.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Erika. Thank you.
That was
I'm
terrific.
hugging you
Great,
all.
great
Thank
talk.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those of you listening, if you're interested in any future events, please, I invite you to come to more Bay Nature events and join as a member if you'd like. But
Great job. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.